Greetings, friends. Continuing with previous ideas. It is really so important to know our real history. What really happened in the past? What is the difference in knowing all these great secrets? First, we must understand that historical chronology is the backbone of humanity. And if it turns out that it is not supported by the facts shown in reality, then all human society tends to navigate aimlessly. Without knowing its past, all the knowledge and truths which have been conceived for thousands of years, all the world's ideologies and beliefs, the etymology, as well as the origins of every line of thought. History is the basis of who we are now. What they teach us from childhood as undeniable truths. That is why controllers are so afraid of criticism of the current story and its chronologies, because they are deceptions that force us to see things differently. There are many examples in history of political decisions made and carried out on the basis of false historical considerations, which led it into disastrous results. History defines our vision of life itself, and the direction in which we exercise our future will. In this way, we can understand how dates and their chronology forms an essential part of our very understanding of life. Many incredible facts receive a new interpretation if we know the hidden history before the 17th century. In the previous video we already talked about the contradictions that exist in the official history, which have not yet received a reasonable scientific explanation. We already talked a little about the Jesuits who established the chronological version that we studied as children. Same, which is full of anomalies and anachronisms, hiding marvels as something normal. From ancient times to the present day, the entire history of mankind is completely detailed by these Jesuits, and in its official chronology we can find the answer to almost any question that the average person asks. In museums we can see objects clearly dated on this or other date without leaving chance for doubt. So, can we really believe that everything they show us there is the absolute truth? We usually believe that the methods for determining the exact age of objects and buildings are well verified and very reliable. However, that is exactly what they want us to believe. The Invisible College of the Jesuits. In this video we will analyze some proofs and historical evidences that will prove without a doubt that our history is nothing but a great tale composed and standardized for the convenience of the people who rule this world. Those who print the little money papers and own the governments. This Jesuit model is designed to minimize all surprising and unexplained facts, to divert and diminish their interest in history while keeping people out of the issues that most really matter. But then, how do archaeologists to determine its historical dates? What are and how function the dating methods? And why is that the vast majority of them, when you make a deep research, it results that are based on mere guesswork and overlapping lies to arrange the tale in a way that makes you never question about anything? The secrets start from the very excavation. They have never explained to us why everything ancient is found buried under layers of earth and sediments, as well as all the structures. This was due to cataclysms or mudfloods, events that occur cyclically around the world. In a moment we will talk about this in more detail, but we must understand that this is something very important that almost no one has noticed, and that is very difficult to understand. Each archaeological stratum was a cataclysm of mud that buried entire cities. That's why all the objects appear broken and scattered. archaeologists still cannot determine the speed of these layers of mud to accumulate, because, in each specific case, this speed is different. The only thing we know for sure is that the deeper layers are older than the upper layers. The study and description of archaeological strata is called archaeological stratigraphy. But, how is determined the exact date of an object in each stratum? For this, different methods are used that deal with physical and chemical phenomena, which, as we said previously, are methods that belongs to alchemy. But, are they really accurate and completely reliable just as they tell us? Next, we will analyze the main dating methods and we will examine their effectiveness with what is said, and we will see if it is really possible to always obtain correct data regarding about the exact age of the objects found on these strata. The first one is the method of dating by analogy. This is done by comparing a found object with another found on the same stratum, in order to establish a relative comparison. But due to the different nature and mobility of the object, this becomes mere speculation. Since this only determines that the objects were buried at the same time in that place, and not the age of each object. Since an object can be treasured for generations and then lost in the mud with a newer one. This method also parses the object and compares it to similar objects to set a parameter. Let's imagine that a buried ring is found. One that looks similar to one illustrated in some 12th century painting. Then, it is established without more, that the ring is from the 12th century without considering that said ring could be treasured for a very long time. And not only that, when archaeologists find a similar ring, they automatically establish that it belongs to the same period, as well as everything found in that stratum. That is tremendous on itself. But the vast problem arises when technological objects are found in extracts that do not correspond to the established period. These objects out of their time are great mysteries that we already talked about in a past video. So, why can't such out-of-time objects be carbon-14 dated without more? Well, that's because carbon-14 can only date organic matter made up of carbon. No rocks or metal. Archaeologists base their dating on organic matter found in the same stratum. So finding organic matter inside a building doesn't mean that the age of the building is the same as that matter. In this way, and continuing with the previous point, we can consider these two reliable methods as discarded. The next method consists of numismatic dating. In other words, by ancient coins found in archaeological sites. For example, let's imagine a settlement being excavated, where objects, let's say, swords were found. Metals that cannot be dated. Then, if archaeologists find coins in the same stratum that contain any date, they already assume that not only these swords, but even the entire settlement also belong to the same period. However, the date on the coin could even only refer to a commemorative date, or a special or religious number, and not a minting date as we use in the present. In fact, the coins with a minting date are extremely rare, as it takes relatively little time for this to be done officially. In antiquity and in Middle Ages this did not matter, giving more value to the material itself than to the date. In addition to the fact that time was counted differently in different empires, and would be decisively changed by the political regime of the moment. Therefore, finding an old coin with a minting date is very rare, and when doing so it should be taken into account that this date may not be the year of minting, but the time of the government of said character. You even have to take into account that we currently put heroic characters who have been dead for centuries on our coins. How can we be sure that the ancients did not do the same? making all our historical conjectures and speculations about the periods of reign completely invalid. Even someone from that time could have found or saved coins belonging to long past empires, coins with the faces of people who died much longer than we think. And when they are found in the same layer of mud, they are dated like everything else, and said character added to the chronology of, for example, Rome, inadvertently basing his dating on mere guesswork. There is also evidence of coins minted in provinces outside the empires, this due both to counterfeiting and to the lack of communication between very remote provinces. These provinces made copies of the imperial coins to trade among themselves with their own silver, not caring that the portrayed character has already died. An example of this is the Greek tetragon coin with the image of Alexander of Macedonia. For many centuries this coin was counterfeited wherever it was needed, all along the Black Sea coast, in Asia Minor, in North Africa, and in the Middle East. Therefore, if a coin of this type is found in an ancient layer, it will be very difficult to determine its true age, always attributing it to the Alexandrian period without further ado. So it is not possible to date with absolute certainty any object around the numismatics found. There are many historians in history, from different countries, who have realized this deception and have spoken about it in books and texts for several centuries. Of the duplicate characters with different names but very similar lives, thus filling the historical gaps and holes left in the current chronology. Many historians have criticized and disqualified the official history of Scaliger and Petavius. One of these was Isaac Newton himself in the 18th century, who fixed events prior to the Alexandrian period back to a more recent time, and not as long ago as they lead us to think. Also the director of the Royal Library of France, the professor of theology, Jean-Jacques Douar. As early as 1690, he claimed that most of the ancient books were false, and that they were written by monks in the 13th century. Let's not forget that Jacques Douar was an unquestionable authority, not only in theology, but also in archaeology, philology, and many other sciences. In the middle of the 18th century, the distinguished Russian scientist, Mikhail Romanosov, father of Russian science, spoke out against the new version of Russian history manufactured by the Germans, Herhard Müller and Gottlieb Baer. He referred to it as destructive, against the Russian history of Tartary. Similarly, a 19th century German philologist named Robert Waldorf, exploring the ancient poetry of Homer, Sophocles and Aristotle, discovered that the style of his works is very similar to the style of medieval troubadours. Moreover, in the Latin of Horatio the influence of Italian and German is observed, languages that did not yet exist in Horace's time according to official history. Waldorf concluded that all these ancient writers are in fact much more recent than what they tell us. The 19th century German historian, Theodor Mommsen, was one of the leading representatives of a scientific field called hypercriticism. Mommsen wrote about the explicit discrepancies in Roman chronology. He was the first who realized that there was a 500-year variation of error in an event as important as the founding of ancient Rome. Nikolai Morozov, director of the Russian Deskov Institute for Natural Sciences, wrote in 1918 about how Scaliger's chronology was artificially extended and why it should be meticulously revised. Morozov determined that in some texts, the same events are dated in different years, which could be due to the transcription and recording made by different chroniclers, same that were later perceived as totally independent facts. These events were treated and placed in parallel, and with very few differences, thus being duplicated events as ghostly reflections of real historical periods. One of these examples is the Emperor Octavian Augustus and Constantine I the Great, whose lives were very similar, including his death. Not only that, there are many examples of characters and repeated historical periods, of which we will talk in future videos. But for now, we must understand that the history that they dictated to us have many very impressive anomalies and alterations that even border on legendary. In past videos, I showed you this image of Strasbourg in ancient Alsace. This is a small town in the western Netherlands, region north of Holland. It is built on an artificial island, which for the time is extremely incredible. This very old little town was not affected by any war or mud cataclysm. It was established before the 14th century, and how we can appreciate this belongs to what would be the Old World Order. That old order, about which they tell us nothing, and force us to believe that they were barbarian people, without real knowledge. However, those constructions are too magnificent, and confuse us as to the level of perfection and detail they had, the incomprehensible refinement. For a long time it was thought that all this detail and adornment typical of these historical periods was simply for aesthetic taste. However, we have stopped building with such majesty, and doing it the old-fashioned way today would be extremely costly, if not impossible. They tell us that these constructions were made in this way for defensive purposes. However, at that time gunpowder already existed, and these fortresses, as this coin shows, were commonly besieged with cannons from the outside and even protected from inside with them. Then, we can conclude that these structures were not perfected in order to shoot from there, or protect, but perhaps for purposes very different from what they tell us. Now we are going to examine some evidence that tells us that there is a lot that is hidden from us about these perfect and ancient geometric structures, as well as the true history of the Empire of Tartary and the Old World Order in Russia, that occupies a leading role in the hegemonic regime of the time. Images of what historians call star forts, also called ravelins. They are certain very impressive constructions whose pattern is repeated in countless places around the world, and that have been minimized and hidden from our history, along with the Tatar Empire and many other incredible facts that we will analyze. The official institutional historians affirms that these fortresses were built in this way to place the arches and their defenses more accurately than the traditional circular towers. However, as there are no tall towers, it makes us question the military or defensive use of these forms, being more likely that had a totally different use. Here we see a wall built around a common fortress. When looking at the simplicity of these, in comparison with the others, we can think, do the tips really make a big difference in the case of a military siege? Enough to justify such a large and complicated construction work? And if it was aesthetic, was it really necessary so much work for something that would only be admirable from the sky? It is interesting to note the perfect scale, as well as the symmetry in relation to all its sides in each of the cases. Always perfect. Historians admit that they have no idea of the tools used in ancient times to measure and trace large spaces with such perfection, not to mention the titanic work of making an artificial island in each of these forts found throughout the world. More interesting still is that during the restorations to some of these structures they realized that the measurements and scales of the tips had some relation with the distances and directions of the energy lines, that is, the currents of etheric energy that circulate through in this the kingdom of air? Even Tesla himself knew about the energy that circulates freely through the air. Could it be that the ancients already knew about these free energies? In another video we already talked about Tartary and the mud deluge that buried gigantic structures. In this old engraving we can appreciate the difference in the ground level. Also a very interesting structure appears there. A ball-shaped sculpture? It could be. The truth is that it is very similar to a Van de Graaff generator. Thus, knowing the UPATs and all those objects and structures out of time that have appeared, and that amaze and puzzle us on that way, we can reassess, and give a second analysis to all those incredibly ancient legends of overwhelming cities, endowed with free energy technologies. Legendary cities such as Atlantis, or Lemuria, Shambhala, and many others. We must understand that all these ancient structures and objects will never be shown to us in schools or universities. This is due to the great controversy that they arouse about their origins and purposes. This is the Slavic calendar, or Sverige circle. We can appreciate the great similarities with the star forts. The star forts are undoubtedly incredible structures because we know nothing about them. The truth is that they are there, reminding us of the glory of the old world. Stories that no longer allow us to know. Look at these maps and think why you spend so much time designing, planning, and building in perfect symmetry. It is also interesting to note that many of these structures are destroyed and covered by dirt or even vegetation. Many others have been renovated and integrated into other buildings. Like, for example, the island of the Statue of Liberty, whose base is much older than the statue itself. These geometric shapes are not random, responding to sacred geometry linked to etheric energy. Even old devices to measure these energies. Incredible artifacts that transport us to a magical and legendary era. Artifacts that, due to their complexity, continue to overwhelm us to this day, and that for obvious reasons will never be shown to you. In this way, we can realize the bitter struggle that exists to hide our past. Gigantic empires with lost technologies. Mysterious objects of astonishing complexity, and for purposes that are often unknown to us. Look at all these extraordinary artifacts which, as we already said, are impossible to date. On such discoveries, archaeologists cannot but shrug their shoulders and try to monetize their find as best as possible. Basing it before some institute with an interesting date that goes according to the officiality. No archaeologist will seek to waste his good money in employment arguing something that goes against the historical chronology established by the Vatican and royalty. That's why everything that is not appropriate is hidden and minimized, or altered, so that no one believes it. In order to never wake up, realize that most of what we were told and are currently told in schools is a lie. Look at these old streets with lighting. What are those wireless lamps? How do they work? I don't think someone puts a candle there every hour in each one of them. Or that wax were dripping all the time on the heads of the people passing by. Could it be that we are dealing with unknown ancient lighting technology? Why does this painting from that time appear the city being illuminated by them? What are these light fixtures portrayed in these works, and how do they work? In this image we can see the etheric energy constituted by its symbols, actually called positive and negative, and how these artifacts canalized it into radiant energy emitting light. Here we can see another image where this same energy is shown, being received by the antennas of the buildings. Do we need more evidence? Here we have one of these ancient artifacts being carried by a woman member of the Knights of Malta after the completion of an appointment. These same artifacts are represented in ancient paintings with a sphere in their center, same which emits the light. Almost all of these artifacts have had their orb removed. However, here we can appreciate one of them. These artifacts were, and are considered sacred since they were created with the use of alchemy and ritualistic magic processes. Later we will make a video of each of these incredible things explaining in detail its origin. But for now we just have to understand that they will never tell us the truth about our true history, about magic, and the alchemical processes that make up this world. They don't want us to know the greatness of our past. They trick us into thinking that everything is and was, just as they tell us. They lied to us to conform to the world they put before our eyes so that we never wonder about the old, about what is truly important. It is time to stop being simple slaves for pieces of paper. Realize that schools will never tell us the truth. They will only tell us what we need to know to be submissive slaves forever, so that we continue to educate our children in the same lies. What will we do about it? Let's unite. Darkness is not fought, it's lighted up. Let's show them that we don't need them. It is time to educate for the future. We each have the power to reach more people. Share. Let's conquer one soul at a time. We speak the truth, and we will be heard. You just have to wake up from the great deception. The system does not work. Time to get out. Reactive Factory Project.